All right, let me start by talking about. I've never heard so much talk about a riding as I have about this one in a by-election of all things out in Jean-Talon near Quebec City. So why is this such a big deal?
Well, first of all, the by-election has not even been called yet, and in the past 48 hours, essentially, we have seen the kind of accusations, the kind of low blows, the kind of downright nastiness you would associate with an ongoing election campaign, and certainly one where the outcome is not necessarily a given. We have the perceived challengers here in Jean-Talon are the Parti Québécois. And they are running a gentleman by the name of Pascal Paradis. He's a lawyer, founder of Lawyers Without Borders. And interestingly enough, it came out, funnily enough, from the CAC that, this is Francois Legault. I'm amazed that Pascal Paradis is running for the Parti Québécois because, he came up to us. He wanted to run for us back in 2020. The problem was he was interested in, he wanted to get a cabinet post. We couldn't guarantee it. And he said, no, thank you. At which point, the PQ and the leader, Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, heads explode. Basically, both sides have accused the other, the CAC, Legault in a sort of indirect way, and Saint-Pierre Plamondon flat out of lying about this. But the thing that gets me, Aaron, is I'm looking at this, and in a way, it's interesting the way you formed your question when we first broached this, because why is this such a big deal? Unless, of course, the publicly published poll says, it's a close race between the CAC and the PQ. Maybe it's a lot closer than we've been led to believe, and perhaps the PQ are doing infinitely better, surfing the dissatisfaction with the CAC in the Quebec City area, and perhaps headed to a by-election victory, which would see their caucus skyrocket from 3 to 4. But I think there's a lot more at stake here. I have a sneaking suspicion that a defeat for the CAC, even a close one, is going to be perceived as a huge crack. This is not a matter of a bunch of Anglos in Montreal complaining about 96 or Bill 21. This is about a francophone de souche riding that used to be liberal. They tossed out the liberals. They adopted the CAC. And this by-election is being called because the incumbent decided she wants to spend more time with her family. And I really think that there are numbers that we're not seeing, or there are perhaps just people out there on the ground who are hearing and seeing things that suggest that even though we're talking about one seat lost by the CAC, and the CAC at the moment holds 89 seats, if it would plummet down to 88 and then still have their supermajority, maybe what they're seeing is perhaps a few little drops from the waves lapping at the edge of the dam, that perhaps this phony war, this kind of cone of Teflon that has surrounded Francois Legault, in fact, since his first term, and was certainly reinforced by the pandemic, that is beginning to flake away. And this is not a really, really good time for this to be occurring, because if the narrative becomes you can't trust the CAC, which is certainly what's being espoused by the Parti Québécois this week, they have a problem on their hands. The latest accusation, and it's certainly not new, but given the context, it's still devastating, is that Pascal Paradis, the PQ candidate, says that while he was talking to the CAC party brass, and this is before the election, he was told, no, the third link, this infamous, highway between Quebec City and Lévis is not going to happen. But just shut up about it, because right now we're campaigning on it. This is the kind of thing that people remember. It doesn't matter about, numbers or cost of living.
Yeah.
When you catch someone in the lie, they knew they were lying and they didn't give a damn. And they, apparently deliberately deceived certainly a lot of voters in the Quebec City area. That's the kind of stuff that's difficult to scrape away. And it is, you can't have a friendly bonjour tout le monde press conference and walk away from that. And I think that's what we're seeing here. I think we're seeing the stakes all of a sudden, and rather unexpectedly, become very, very high in the riding of Jean-Talon.
Jim, fair to ask, I'm going to ask it anyway, are liberals, conservatives, are they just also rans in this, completely off the table?
Well, to be fair, I believe that Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois is going to have a presser tomorrow to address this very issue. And Marc Tanguay, interim leader of the Quebec Liberal Party, says, I think we have a shot. And anything is possible, I guess, But I would not be taking money, unless it was monopoly money, to bet on the Liberals' chances in that riding, that they'll regain that riding. But hey, listen, who knew that furniture would be flying around so soon, as I say, even before the election has been called? This could get very, very interesting in a Game of Thrones kind of way. So, stay tuned. Who knows what's going to happen? And maybe those numbers will change. All I know is I haven't seen the CAC in this kind of trouble ever since 2018.
Oh, that's interesting in and of itself. All right, let me move on and talk about the Board of Trade, immigration. I'm going to guess the CAC are not real happy every time the Board of Trade comes out and says, immigration should be higher. We've been saying that for a while.
I know, and they submitted a brief this week to I guess it's a legislative committee on immigration, and it's interesting because they have the usual: we need people, we need employees, we need skills. The economy can't afford to atrophy based on some outdated notion of Quebec's immigration. But what they threw in, what Michel Leblanc, head of the Montreal Board of Trade, threw in this time is, the one thing we can't ignore is that Quebec's political weight is literally disappearing before our eyes. As our population begins to shrink, we are going to see fewer ridings, less representation, less political power within Canada. And now some people are saying, we don't care, they're a bunch of separatists. And that may be true. However, for the time being, they're still a part of the Federation. And Francois Legault knows full well that if he wants to walk in and start pounding the table, he better have some political clout behind him. And if that, this demographic slide continues, it doesn't matter how many garbage laws like Bill 96 that they're going to cover. French won't be protected in Quebec simply because we'll be losing francophones.
I wonder how long this immigration battle, if we want to call it that. It was interesting the other day, right after the federal minister came out and talked about students. Remember putting a ban on international students? How long did it take Francois Legault to say, no, we're not doing that here? Literally, minutes.
We're going to be the masters of
That's
who
right.
gets to stay here and do whatever. And it was interesting. I saw a report this morning that apparently Bernard Drinville, who was pleading, virtually crying tears of blood yesterday, saying we're short all these teachers, was asked, well, do you think you might rethink Bill 21 that would allow people, observant Jews and Muslims to teach? And he says, no, we're not going to do that.
No, of course
So
not.
I think we see pretty well where this government stands on education, and we know that essentially this government answers to the 40% of Quebecers who voted for them in the regions and who seem to be very, very happy being told by this government that you should be scared of everything and we're the only ones who can protect you. It's rubbish. It's nonsense. For the time being, it's going to work. Let's see what happens up in Jean-Talon, though. That might be the start of something big.
James Mennie over at the Montreal Gazette. Thank you, Jim.
Adamant.